Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on applicant tracking and recruiting. Today, there are some abbreviations. These will be in your slide packet. I'm not going to cover these, but at least you know they're there. So we want to talk about what does the OFCCP focus on in applicant tracking and why. And I know a lot of you on the phone are recruiters and you're handling your applicant tracking systems. So we want you to understand why you have to do all of this. It is not just busy work. The OFCCP compliance officer reviews a series of reports looking for significant disparity, which is an indicator of discrimination. They look at your incumbency versus your estimated availability. What are they looking for? They're looking for the employee headcount in the protected categories versus the U.S. Census data in the area where the employee lives. They're looking at your adverse impact analysis. They want to know, for instance, in your hires versus applicants, they want to know who applied versus who was hired in the protected categories. They look at your recruiting and outreach. So if you're low in headcount, you have adverse impact, they want to know where did you post your job. So we're going to look during audit prep, we want you to know what to look for so that you're prepared in case you do get audited. So let's say where there are job openings for administrative support jobs, for instance. Who applied? That's what they look for. Who was the job offer extended to, or who was hired? Does adverse impact exist? Can I prove the selection of the most qualified individual? Where was the job posted? And was the job posting successful in order to bring in specific protected category applicants? So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at some documents here. When I talked about incumbency, the OFCCP looks at all three of these reports. This is a sample company incumbency report. This tells the OFCCP who is in your head count. So you can see for the 1B, first, mid, officials, and managers, this company has 18 individuals, 12 are female, making up 66% of the job group. What's available in their census area is 42% female. So they exceed by 4.3 individuals or 4 females what the OFCCP would expect them to have. If we go down here, we see a negative 1.9 under American Indians. So this particular company has 32 professionals. These are people that have a degree to do what they do. And for American Indians, they have 0. What's available in their census area right here is 5.86 American Indians. So they would expect them, 5.86%, they would expect them to have 1 individual or 2 if you round this up. So they have a negative 1.9 when it says the difference in what is expected minus what their incumbency is. So they do have some shortness in head count. Down here on the administrative support workers, we see that we have 48 total individuals. They have a shortness in head count for Hispanics. They're not short in head count for minorities, though. It shows that they have 22 minorities, making up 45% of the job group. What's available for minorities in their census area is 33%, so they would expect them to have 15. And so they have 22, so they have 6 more minorities than they would expect them to have. But they only have 2 Hispanics. They would expect them to have 12 Hispanics. So they have a placement goal here. But you notice that they have 22 minorities, but why aren't they listed in these particular categories? The reason is because this company is not consistently extending the voluntary invitation to self-ID at the applicant stage. And so a lot of their applicants are unidentified in their race, gender, vet, or disability status. In this particular case, you might say, well, we have this same outcome because a lot of our applicants just don't self-ID race or gender. That is true. So if you have an electronic applicant tracking system, so you are using an electronic employee application and it's going through maybe your website, or it might be going through a third-party administrator or vendor, what we would like you to do and what we suggest is make the self-ID questions a mandatory field. Now this, by definition, is a voluntary self-ID. So in order to do that, you have to add a checkbox that says, I decline to self-ID in this particular category. By doing that, what happens when people are going through applications, they're trying to get a job, they're going fast, they're having to fill out all of these forms electronically for every company. If you make this faster for them by not having them put in mandatory categories, and a lot of times they'll just skip over it. So what you want to do is you want to put in that additional question so that they answer the question and they don't just skip by it, and it will help you to gather more information. The other thing the OFCCP is looking for is they're looking for the shortness in headcount in all these categories. So you see here under here it says Asian. There's one individual. They want them to have 2, so they're short by 1. Now we're going to take a look at an example. These are hires. So we looked at our admin support workers, and we did notice that we were short. We have a placement goal for Hispanics. So this is the next place that the OFCCP goes. They look at your adverse impact analysis. So this is an analysis of your hires and your offers versus your applicants. So this is where your applicant tracking comes in. Your applicant tracking is critical to your audit. In this particular case, they did have one Hispanic applicant that applied, and that individual was given an opportunity. So although this company is short in headcount for Hispanics and they have a placement goal, are they giving Hispanics opportunity when they do apply? So the answer is yes. So in this case, the OFCCP would want to know, where are you posting the job? And are you reaching out specifically to Hispanics? And so you would, those of you who are recruiters, you would want to show your applicant log and show where you posted the job. And you might have individuals that applied for the job that are not qualified. So this applicant pool right here, this applicants and all these people that applied, only covers those individuals that were truly qualified. So you don't want to have a lot of people on here just to show a robust applicant pool if they're not qualified. In this case, for our professionals, we see that we have 13 non-minorities that applied. We have an indicator of discrimination against non-minorities. Why is that? Because they were hired at a 30% rate versus minorities were hired at a 71% rate. So that whenever this ratio shows a difference in the selection rate that is much higher or lower, it does indicate a flashing notice of significant disparity, which is an indicator of discrimination. So then what do? They go back and they take a look at the non-minority applicants and the minority applicants, and so they would look at all these, they would look at your applicant log, and they would look at all these resumes and applications, and they would decide for themselves, did you hire the most qualified? So these 14 that were hired right here need to be the most qualified individuals. We do see that the individual race categories are getting an opportunity, but non-minorities are not getting as much of an opportunity as minorities. So does that matter? Yes. It's race and or gender. It doesn't say a specific race. So there's an indicator of discrimination against non-minorities. Can you have an indicator against discrimination against males? Yes. So it's race and or gender. It doesn't say which race or which gender. Now we're going to take a look at placement goals. This is the next area that OFCCP goes to. So they look at your incumbency, they look at your adverse impact, they look to see if you have placement goals. So we noted before that there was a placement goal for administrative support workers for Hispanics. Again, they go back to the adverse impact. They ask to see all the resumes or applications. So how long do you have to keep those resumes, and how long do you have to keep your affirmative action plan? In order, if you get audited, how far can they go back? In this particular case, they usually will only go back to the prior year. Can they go back further? Yes, they can, but they typically don't. If they can prove that you hired the most qualified individual in this particular round of data, they probably won't go back further. But you want to keep your plan 3 years and the data that backs it up. So as we're talking, when you're talking about your job posting content, remember we said create a job ad based on current job description. So you have to hire the most qualified. So how do you know if you're qualified if you're an applicant? You go back to the job ad. So when you're posting the job ad, it's important that you put the basic qualifications. That is a mandatory part of your job ad, and they should be based on your job description. Most of you have current job descriptions, so this is an area where you need to always review your job descriptions, go over them with the hiring managers to make sure the qualifications are current and it's exactly what the hiring manager is looking for. You must have A, B, or C. Then you might want to add preferred qualifications. We prefer if you have X, Y, Z. So your A, B, and C does not change. Your preferred may. So you may say, well, you know, we're only getting those that meet A, B, and C. We're really not getting X, Y, Z. So we will go ahead and hire the most qualified in the people that have the basic qualifications. But if you get people that do have the additional preferred qualifications, that might be the person that you want to select. So when the OFCCP goes through the resumes and applications, they are looking for these qualifications. So this is the OFCCP's outreach regulations: external dissemination of policy, outreach, and positive recruitment. Required outreach efforts. The contractor shall undertake appropriate outreach and positive recruitment activities such as those listed in paragraph F. So we'll cover that. Efforts that are reasonably designed to effectively recruit protected veterans. So the area for protected veterans is the State Employment Office, and you can choose additional outreach. These are the outreach categories you need to have. So those of you that are doing the outreach and job postings for your companies, some of you may be recruiters, some of you may be the HR director. It all depends. Some of you are using external third parties to do this, but you need to make sure that you have a source for each one of these areas. The State Employment Office is critical. Now, we'll give you the website and how to figure that out. You need, for every job, a source for females. So are you going to use the same recruitment source for engineers as you are for administrative support workers? So you need to have an appropriate outreach recruitment source for each of these categories for every job. And it needs to be something that is going to work for you. Then you need to have an outreach for the minority categories. Blacks or African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander. You need to have outreach for veterans. So the State Employment Office, when you register with them, you need to register as a federal contractor. That will then bring into play the local veterans employment rep, and that person is specifically hired to help you bring in qualified veterans. And it is a free service, and it is mandatory. You need to have outreach for disabled. In the state of California, you can go to the California Department of Rehabilitation. We'll take a look at that real quick. Not rehabilitation and correction. This is what it looks like. In the top right over here it says Find Us. Over here it says District and Branch Offices. So it looks like there are some offices that are closed. So let's say that you're in San Diego. Go over here and we hit on the district for San Diego, and it gives the branch offices. Now these may not post jobs, but I think they can tell you of companies where you can post jobs that will help you with recruiting for individuals with disabilities. If you are outside of the state of California, you should have a Department of Rehabilitation that you can reach out to. We also are going to talk about going to the state employment office. This is where you go to servicelocator.org. So you put this in, this will take you to the one-stop centers in all the states and U.S. territories. So you are required to post with the state. This is a mandatory posting for all jobs except your jobs that last 3 days or less. So these are jobs on your payroll, and they only are being paid 3 days or less. A lot of people use agencies for this. Internal promotions do not need to be posted externally. We're asked this question a lot. If you are going to promote from within, and you know that that's what you're going to do, this individual is already on your company payroll, and you're going to promote them from job A to job B. You do not need to post this job externally. If you are hiring from the outside, they are not on your payroll, that's when you do need to post the job posting. If you have an executive and top official, that means like a CEO or one of those, you do not need to post with the state employment office. But if you're working with the local veterans employment rep, maybe Colonel so-and-so could do your job. So I would work with that rep and see if they can't bring in top executives for you as well. It's a good way to bring in vets. Any questions on this, let us know. When you're posting with the state, the OFCCP wants you or requires you to give them specific information. So this is the information you want to communicate with your local veterans employment rep when you're signing up with your state employment office. Status as a federal contractor is number one. If you don't tell them that, then you will not have the assistance of the local veterans rep and you will be out of compliance. Number two, your division name and address of the hiring location, the line of business, frequency of open positions, the hiring official contact name, phone, and email. They need to know how to reach you. Your recruitment areas, your request for priority referrals of qualified veterans, any special requests, date parameters of your posting, and contact information for any and all third-party employment services. You have flexibility to choose recruitment sources, and you have flexibility to switch between and among different recruitment sources. So, for instance, if you were hiring again for engineers, you might switch recruitment sources if you are hiring for your administrative support positions. There's no requirement for the length of time to keep your job posting active, and we're asked this question a lot. The requirement is consistency within all of the job postings. So when you're looking at these job postings here, the language, the basic qualifications that you list has to be the same for all of these. It has to be equal language, and it has to be posted for an equal amount of time. And that's important. You need to be consistent. So remember, there is no mandatory time to keep your job posting active. Your qualifications must be listed and you must be consistent. This is search engine sourcing. So let's say you go on CareerBuilder or Monster or Indeed or one of those search engines. You set up your search criteria using the basic qualifications for the position that are listed in your job ad. So you set up your job ad and then you list your basic qualifications in your search engine criteria. Then you want to track all the results of your search. This works for confidential hires where possibly you may be in the near future going to terminate someone, but you really are not ready for that yet, and you want to bring in a backup set of applicants or even a hire. This works well for that, but at the same time, where the adverse impact results, conduct a further search. So let's say that you only get, if you have 100 responses and you get all white males, which is very improbable, but for my example, if that you have that, then you have to conduct a further search. If you need more applicants, you put in your search criteria and you're not getting what you want, widen your search criteria. If you're getting too many applicants, you want to increase your basic qualifications and put in preferred qualifications, and it should help narrow things down, but they have to be of business necessity and job related. Be able to prove your process to the OFCCP. So we're going to take a look at some applicant tracking data, and I think that will help you. So one of the things we want to caution you about is not all applicants use computers. So we're telling you in your search engine sourcing, you need to use a wide variety of job posting sources to avoid adverse impact of disadvantaged groups. So those of you that, like the example of the person that is searching on Indeed, you have to widen your search so that you're using the state employment office so that the individual can respond to a state employment office job posting. Never pick and choose applicants from your search, and select all your applicants that result from your search unless you use the absolute numerical method. And we're going to take a look at that. These are basic qualifications. What I'd like to do first, though, is go back and take a look at this sample applicant tracking log. And this is a company that posted electronically, and they have their applicant tracking system has tracked for them, but they have not been consistent in posting these jobs. So remember earlier we looked at the example of the adverse impact where the job group administrative support worker had adverse impact with Hispanics. So we see here in our example that we did have an Hispanic hire, and this is the one we looked at when we looked to see are Hispanics getting an opportunity. So we go through, there was one individual here that's an individual with a disability. They look at the dates. So we see that this person was hired August 1st. Are all of these dates before this hire date? Yes, they are. So these are applicants. Were they all qualified? We can see over here that they're listing the reasons. These are the disposition reasons that tells why the applicant was not hired. This is a mandatory field. You must track and answer the question, why was this person not hired? This person's application was incomplete. This one lacked the experience with target population and unclear work history. This one lacks experience in college setting with target population. So as we're looking through these, you have to track all of that information. So those of you that are not getting good results for race and gender, again, we encourage you to make those self-ID fields mandatory fields with the option of I decline to self-ID. Then that will help you. In this particular case, we're looking at an accounting manager hired. This person was hired March 23rd, 2017. This person applied March 24th. So this is an indicator that the recruiter did not close the posting at the time of hire. So this individual we would not want to include if we turn this over to the OFCCP. So if Employers Group is writing your affirmative action plan, we're going to look for all of these little exceptions and we will communicate with you. In this case, we have an assembler packager. This is a temp conversion, came from an agency. So the people that are using staff agencies, the example of the one individual that had the question on the staff agency, you want to have an agreement with your staffing agency and that they are posting jobs for you on your behalf with your diversity recruitment sources, including the State Employment Office. In this case, the agency is also assisting with these disposition reasons, so they're tracking them. There's a couple ways you can do this when you are working with agencies, but you have to have an applicant pool. That's critical. When you convert a temporary employee that's being paid by the agency to an employee that's being paid by the company on company payroll, you have to have an applicant pool. So you would be asked the question, where is the applicant pool? Who else applied for this job? And the agency may be the ones that have that information. In this case, this is a buyer. There's no applicant pool. This tells us the job was probably not posted. So this is an employee referral. Person was probably very qualified. They were told to go to the company website. Here it says, how did they apply? They went through the company's website. But there are no other applicants. So you can't just hire somebody without posting the job and giving opportunity to the recruitment area, which is your census area, to apply for the job and have a shot at the job. So they would say you were discriminating against the others in the community that may have been qualified for this position. This is a CNC programmer. There's only one applicant, one hire on here. In this case, this was a difficult position to find. This was the only qualified applicant. Every once in a while that does happen. In that case, the OFCCP may ask to see your applicant pool of the other people that applied that were not qualified. It's usually not the case. They're usually, if you've done a good job of applicant tracking and all of the others, they will usually let it go. But if you have not tracked applicants, you can't use this excuse if you have not properly posted the job. You have to remember you have to prove where you post those jobs. So you have to keep the job postings and you have to keep the proof of where you posted those jobs. And this down here, this particular person is an engineer that was a rehire. Do you need to repost the job if you know you're going to rehire someone? Especially if it is a callback from a layoff, or if you have a union and it's a callback from a layoff. You may want to post the job, but you don't have to, especially if it's a union callback from a layoff. If you're calling people back from a layoff, you have to keep a list of who was laid off during the same time period, who you invited in the callback, and why. If you called back everyone in that layoff, you then have to track who reapplied and responded that they do want to come back to the company and who did not. And if they gave any reasoning, you have to list that. So in this particular case, this was an engineer that was called back and was rehired. In this case, these are the environmental health and safety representatives, and we have several hires in this particular case. But when we looked at the dispositions, whoever did this recruiting was not consistent in putting in disposition reasons. So the OFCCP does not know why these individuals were not hired. This particular person says they were hired, but they were not hired because they're not on the snapshot. They were not terminated. Where did they go? If they were hired, they should be on the snapshot data. So they were not. So you want to watch for that. The other thing that we see is this one is a temp conversion with no applicant. So what happened here is they brought in a temp for an HR coordinator, and then they brought him over for the agency. This person may have been payrolled, which is a problem. We talked about that in adverse impact. If they're payrolled and you have no applicant pool, then you're not properly using your agency. You have to post the job, and the people you payroll have to be the most qualified. So this person is listed as a hire, and there is no applicant pool. This is another one that this requisition, this person that was hired, is out of the time frame. So in this particular company, these people were put on here, and this is probably for next year's data. So this particular rec is out of the time frame. Here's another one. This is the only qualified applicant. So in this one, I noticed that the vets are not getting hired. So we come up here, and we're going to take a look at who applied that were veterans. This declined to state, so this company did put in that additional checkbox that says I declined to self-ID, and that worked for them. But we want to take a look at who were the vets that applied. None of these people were hired. So why are the vets not getting hired? You would have to prove that to the OFCCP, and are any of them qualified? Neither are these two individuals with disabilities here. None of these vets. So the people in yellow that I shaded in yellow are the hires. So you know, as each thing, as you're exposing data to the OFCCP, the questions can go further. Okay, now we're going to go back to our slides. This is our selection process. Remember how I said that the OFCCP may request to see your applications and or resumes. They are looking for the basic qualifications. So you base your selection decision on the applicant's knowledge, skill, and ability to do the job. And then you're benchmarking their resume against your own basic qualifications. So that's why you want to go back to an updated job description, make sure your job ad has those basic qualifications. If they are not something that they must have, then they are not a basic qualification. You always select the most qualified. This is the OFCCP opinion. While employers can and should hire the most qualified workers for the job, they cannot create artificial barriers to employment that unfairly block any individual from competing for jobs. That means you cannot put in qualifications that are artificial. When we talked about screening large amounts of applicants, you can use what's called the absolute numerical limit. So let's say that you do a resume search, or you post a job with Indeed, Monster, Career Builder, one of those, Ladders, and you receive a lot of applicants, maybe 1,000, depending upon the corporation. Sort your resumes and application by the date and the time that was received, the date they applied. Choose the first group. So let's say you choose the first 30. Apply your selection criteria. So you're looking for basic qualifications and possibly preferred qualifications. So you want to apply it to the first 30. Never alter your selection criteria in your job ad, and then be able to prove to the OFCCP your process of selection. Let's say that you did not find what you're looking for in the first 30. Go to the next 30. Repeat your process. Save your applicants. The other individuals that whose resume was not reviewed are not considered. So you need a disposition reason not considered. But everybody needs to understand what that means. That doesn't mean that they're not qualified. It means they were not considered when you reviewed the resumes. This is another method you can use, but we want to caution you that this formula in red here is your actual formula. You put down when you're in Excel, you put it down the right side of your random sampling. You hit enter and it will random sample your data. So we suggest that you test this, save an additional copy of your applicant log before you do this. When you're finished with one random sampling, remove your formula, or every time you open your spreadsheet, it will resort. This is the electronic applicant tracking rule. Number one, the individual must submit an expression of interest to an open position through the internet or related electronic data technologies. Now, we are asked quite often, what happens if we have an applicant that just writes any or all positions or something like that? They have to submit an expression of interest to a specific job title. Number two, the expression of interest must be in writing, so it should be either a resume and or application. You can do both. Number three, the contractor considers the individual for employment in a particular position. Number four, the individual must possess the basic qualifications for the position. Number five, the individual at no point in the contractor's selection process prior to receiving an offer of employment from the contractor removes him or herself from further consideration. That means if that you call them and they say, oh, I already got another job, or, you know, it's too far to drive, or I'm not interested, then they are self-removing. So you need to note that in the disposition reason. If you have applicants that are walk-ins, so these are the people that they're directing in the electronic application, they are directing people to apply for jobs, or you have people that just walk in and they say, I'm looking for a job, here's my resume. They need to go through the electronic process, and they're valuable to you, so you don't want to offend them. So we encourage you to give them a flyer or something that directs them to your company website on how to apply for your jobs. The other thing you can do is send them to the state employment office, because remember, you're posting all of your jobs under the mandatory posting of the state employment office. It needs to be the state employment office, somewhat close to your workplace. And you can post with multiple state employment offices. So this is a true or false. Under the non-internet applicant tracking rule, you must track all applicants whether they are qualified or not. This includes walk-ins that come in the door and hand you a resume or request to fill out an application. This also includes all resumes that your management may receive as expressions of interest. Now remember, this is the non-internet applicant tracking rule. The answer is true. So if you have people walking in and that's what you allow, and you take in their applications and consider them, then you have broken the electronic applicant tracking rule, and you have to track all expressions of interest, all walk-ins, whether they are qualified or not. Applicant selection, yes or no. If the contractor does not open the resumes that come in through the electronic applicant process, and the contractor hires an employee referral, can the contractor be charged with discrimination? The answer is yes. The individual selected must be the most qualified applicant, and the other applicants that applied before or at the same time as the referral should be considered. We've seen companies get high-dollar fines for this. These are hiring individuals with disabilities. So if an applicant with a disability requests a reasonable accommodation, you must enter into the interactive process. So we are going to go over this a little bit in our process tomorrow, but you do want to be aware of this. You have to enter into the interactive process. You should collect your self-ID data as early in the applicant process as is possible. So some of you are collecting self-ID data when they're hired. You have to collect self-ID data as early in the applicant process as is possible. That means when they send in an expression of interest, they should be given an opportunity to complete the self-ID. You can do it via email. Your electronic application can do it, or you may have an electronic application on your career site. But you must be able to prove to the OFCCP when you collect the self-ID data. Separate the self-ID data from the applicant packet before it goes to the hiring manager. The hiring manager should never receive the invitation to self-ID forms. In your applicant tracking data, measure adverse impact of selection for hire and applicants before at the end. Do some self-audits during the year. So the applicant tracking data is used to measure adverse impact. So we talked earlier about temps to hire. You must have an applicant pool for your temporary employees converted to employees. This is the OFCCP opinion on temps. The contractor's record-keeping obligations are the same whether it screens job seekers itself or whether it contracts with an employment agency to screen job seekers on its behalf with the employer's selection procedures. So it says the contractor's record-keeping obligation. So this is your key subject here. It's your record-keeping, not the agency. So you remember we told you in our sample spreadsheet that you have to record why the individual was not hired. So these particular examples are appropriate. This is the kind of disposition reason the OFCCP is looking for. If employers group is writing your affirmative action plan, when we send you your sample data, we're giving you full lists of appropriate disposition reasons. So you cannot give it dispositions that don't answer the question, why was the applicant not the most qualified? So the first one is not enough relevant experience, did not display skills listed on the resume, lack of relevant education, and that has to be job related and a business necessity. Maybe they failed the skills test. That again, test anything that is pre-employment must be of business necessity and it must be job related. Number 5, not most qualified, unprofessional dress or demeanor. Now that happens. Let's say that someone comes in and they do have the skills listed on their resume, but they come in and they're completely unprofessional. So, we hear all kinds of stories. So that is something that you can put down. Number 6, a more experienced applicant was selected. This applicant was selected for another position with the company. So all of those answer why this applicant was not most qualified. Your disposition reasons must be strategic. They must be consistent. Dispositions codes help to counter statistical analysis where there is adverse impact. So an individual that falls out of the applicant process maybe is no longer interested. Maybe they are not eligible to work in the U.S. Maybe they're not a U.S. person if you fall under ITAR compliance. So you want to take a look at your disposition reasons. So if you're a recruiter, we're going to depend on your documentation. This is recruiting versus outreach, so we're completely switching hats here. Recruiting is when you post your job through your selected recruitment sources and then you select and you hire. Outreach is not the same. It is direct communication with your recruitment sources. So if you are using a third party, you need to really pay attention to this because we had one client get a OFCCP violation for not doing their outreach assessment. The purpose of the outreach assessment is to ensure critical evaluations of your job posting, to improve upon your recruitment and outreach efforts, and to maximize your connections with all your recruitment sources. So what this is you have to make new friends with your recruitment sources, and you have to communicate with them at least annually So the outreach can't simply be done by sending your jobs to an aggregator. So this is your third-party vendor that you're using to post jobs. Outreach can only be effective if the contractor, that's you, builds relationships with the local outreach sources. So how do you do that if you're using a third party to do your recruiting? We're going to take a look at some samples. Send each of your recruitment source a letter telling them about your job openings and invite them to refer qualified applicants to you for the job. So if you are on the line and you're using staffing agencies and converting temps to hire, you need to have this kind of an agreement. Make it a mini contract. If Employers Group is writing your plan, we will provide you some sample letters. Invite your staffing agency or your recruitment source to assist you in your diversity recruitment efforts. Be specific. Use all of those categories that we listed earlier. And request a signature back that they agree to cooperate and assist you, especially if you're only using agencies. Make sure you have a recruitment source letter in place if you are using a headhunter for high-level positions. If you're only using a search engine, you need to select some additional recruitment sources. The use of a recruiting firm in the hiring process doesn't relieve you from your record-keeping obligations. So again, this is OFCCP opinion. This is a notice of violation if you do not do the outreach. Corporation failed to undertake appropriate outreach and positive recruitment activities that were reasonably designed to effectively recruit qualified individuals with disabilities. Use of third-party vendor to send job postings of open positions to various organizations is not appropriate outreach for positive recruitment activities or recruitment. So on the outreach assessment, we can give you more information on this, and you can order it. If we're not writing your plan, we can give you an outreach assessment tool. If we are writing your plan, you should have already received one. If you're using a third-party vendor to do your outreach, like America's Job Exchange, Direct Employer, one of those, what you want to do is contact your sales agent or your representative and ask them for how to use their software to do the outreach assessment. They have built-in software in their systems, and they will teach you how to do it, but you have to manually contact every one of the recruitment sources that your third-party vendor is using to post your jobs, and you have to document it. We're out of time, but I want to take a look really quickly at the outreach assessment so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so on the left side, what we've done here is we've listed types of recruitment sources that individuals use, and we've included all of them. So this is part of our tool that we will sell to you if we're not writing your plan. This is to enter the contact name. This is the contact email, their phone number, the date you have contacted them. Then the OFCCP has all these additional questions that they want you to answer when you are completing your outreach assessment. Remember, the outreach assessment is mandatory. Okay, thank you. And for those of you that want more information on our process, you can go ahead and email us. This is our information. You can email Stephen at service1@employersgroup.com, or we provided you each of our email addresses. So thank you everyone so much.